represented Sheikh Omar at trial. That was in 1995, along with Ramsey Clark and Abdeen Jabara. I was lead trial counsel. He was convicted in September of 95, sentenced to a life prison plus 100 years, or one of the usual outlandish sentences. We continued, all three of us, to visit him while he was in jail. He was a political client. That means that he is targeted by the government, and because it is so important to prisoners to be able to have access to their lawyers. Sometime in 1998, I think maybe it was, they imposed severe restrictions on him. That is, his ability to communicate with the outside world, to have interviews, to be able to even call his family was limited by something called special administrative measures. The lawyers were asked to sign on for these special administrative measures and warned that if these measures were not adhered to, they could indeed lose contact with their client, in other words, be removed from his case. In 2000, I visited the Sheikh, and he asked me to make a press release. This press release had to do with the current status of an organization that at that point was basically defunct, the Jamaat Islamiyah, and I agreed to do that. In May of, maybe it was later than that, sometime in 2000, I made the press release. Interestingly enough, we found out later that the Clinton administration under Janet Reno had the option to prosecute me, and they declined to do so, based on the notion that without lawyers like me or the late Bill Kunstler or many that I could name, the cause of justice is not well served. They need the gadflies. So at any rate, they made me sign on to the agreement again not to do this. They did not stop me from representing him. I continued to represent him, and it was only after 9/11 in April of 2002 that John Ashcroft came to New York, announced the indictment of me, my paralegal, and the interpreter for the case on grounds of materially aiding a terrorist organization. One of the footnotes to the case, of course, is that Ashcroft also appeared on nationwide television with Letterman that night, ballyhooing the great work of Bush's Justice Department in indicting.
General counsel for the Bureau in Washington called yesterday to say that they had received the recommendation of the warden of the prison for compassionate release for Lynne. So that leaves it up to the director and Judge Kodal, the judge. If those join in the recommendation for compassionate release, you'll be released. And of course, it's an urgent matter because of the advanced stage of cancer, which should go straight to Sloan-Kettering.
Renee Feltz, you just saw Lynne Stewart on Friday. Can you talk about your meeting, talk about her condition, how she looked?
Well, Amy, to me, this is literally a story of life and death. This is a story of a woman we saw earlier in the show who was feisty, a little bit overweight, and full of life and vigor. When I saw Lynne approaching me when I first entered the federal prison on Friday for a pen and paper interview.
What do you mean pen and paper?
Well, we had requested, because we're a television and radio program, to do an on-camera interview, or at the very least a recorded telephone interview. And we were told that for security reasons that request was denied. We're currently appealing that. So when I went to see her, I was only allowed to take in a notepad, and she wasn't allowed to take in any notes herself, which she's used to doing because, of course, she's a lawyer and used to meeting with clients in prison and being able to refer to her notes. But in terms of what I observed about her health, compared to previous people who visited her, she seems to be going downhill rapidly. Like I was saying, this feisty woman that we've seen earlier in the show today in these clips, when I saw her, was now a 73-year-old woman who was thinner, who was wearing a knit cap because she had gone bald from 4 chemo treatments, and was using a walker to slowly approach me, and told me that basically she has to nap for an hour or so, even to do something as simple as take a shower. She's been telling her supporters that she won't be able to reply to their letters right away because she's needing to rest. And in fact, she was wearing, she has been put into originally her own hospital room because she had to be isolated from general population because of her low white blood cell count, if this indicates anything about her condition since receiving chemo. The other thing that Lynne told me when I saw her on Friday about her health is that she's finished 4 chemo treatments. She didn't actually begin those chemo treatments until about 4 months after she was told that her cancer had come back from remission. She originally had breast cancer in remission, and now it's come back in 2 places in one place in each lung, in her back, and then under her left armpit and her lymph node. And the chemo treatments she received were successful with the lymph node in the back, but her lung cancer did not respond to it, and so she still seemed pretty weak. And according to her, her physician is not even clear exactly what the next steps will be for her in terms of her treatment.
Ramsey Clark, you've known Lynne Stewart for a long time, and you, in fact, brought this case to her about 2 decades ago?
1994.
So tell us about this background. Why was this case important to you?
Well, it was a major case in international terms. Internationally famous Islamic scholar, Sheikh Omar Abdel-Rahman, had been indicted in the United States, and it was imperative that both the appearance and the fact of effective representation in court be made. Some people had come to me and asked me to do it or to find counsel, and over a period of time I talked to people and finally thought of Lynne, and thought it would be wonderful if a woman could do it. She came in on a Saturday afternoon, and her husband Ralph came with her, said, "Don't do it, Lynne," prophetically, and she said, "I'll do it if the judge will give more time," because the case was set for it's a big case with 17 defendants. It was set for about 3 months from this time. If the judge will give more time, and if on meeting the Sheikh he would accept her. The judge gave more time, and the Sheikh met with her, and they became fast friends, actually. He accepted her.
And then talk about why Lynne Stewart is in jail. The Sheikh was convicted.
The government has introduced something called SAM, Special Administrative Measures, that prohibit or seek to prohibit an attorney from effective representation of a client by requiring confidentiality and prohibiting release of information, passing out the statements from a client. And Lynne was charged with passing messages from the Sheikh to the world through the media.
And then later on, her sentence was increased. After civil rights lawyer Lynne Stewart was convicted, she was sentenced to 28 months in prison. She was released pending appeal. Then she made a comment during a press conference outside the courthouse that seems to have played a key role in her sentence, later being increased to 10 years in prison.
I don't think anybody would say that going to jail for 2 years is something you look forward to, but as my clients have said to me, I can do that standing on my head.
So there she is speaking outside the courtroom, and so this added on, Ramsey Clark, 10 years to her sentence?
It didn't add on 10. It took the 28 months up to 10 years. They resentenced her. The Court of Appeals directed the district court that does the sentencing to reconsider the sentence, and a 10-year sentence was imposed. So that's...
How unusual is that for a comment she made outside the courthouse?
Well, I've been practicing law for longer than you want to hear about, and I've never heard of it happening before. It's, but the SAMs, the Special Administrative Measures, are a unique restriction on effective representation of counsel. They prohibit counsel from doing things that counsel are used to doing in defense of their clients.
In addition to calling for her compassionate release from prison, Lynne Stewart's defense team has filed a cert petition asking the Supreme Court to hear her case. It reads in part, freedom of speech does not exist in the abstract. It can only flourish in an effective forum. For in reality, free speech is found in a multitude of circumstances. Not long ago, it was young people with long hair tramping around a federal courthouse chanting, "No, no, we won't go." It's an American flag sewn to a pair of old blue jeans. It's all this and much more that defy description. It's indivisible. We cannot save it for one person and deny it to another. It must exist for all of us, or there is a real risk that someday it may not exist for any of us. And so it must exist for Lynne Stewart along with everyone else, because her words are entitled to the same protection from prosecution as other political speech. Under no circumstances should her words and beliefs subject her to 8 more years of imprisonment, her defense team wrote. Your response, Renee Feltz, as you look at this case, and then talk about the government's own report on compassionate release.
Well, so in addition to Lynne's pending request for compassionate release, which I think has reached a major turning point based on the call that Ramsey Clark received on Monday, she has what they call a cert petition pending before the U.S. Supreme Court, and that's basically arguing a First Amendment issue of free speech, as we just mentioned in that quote. And the crux of it is, can someone who says something after they're convicted outside of the courthouse, can that be used to then up their sentence after the sentence has already been issued? And there's another argument that's a little complicated we won't get into, but the government has asked for an extended period of time to reply to the cert petition, and until they do so, it won't actually go before the U.S. Supreme Court. And based on Lynne's lawyer Jill Shello's analysis, it probably won't actually get to the court until later this fall. So really the compassionate release is what people are focusing on. And in regards to this Inspector General report that came out from the Department of Justice, essentially it's arguing that this safety valve that exists for people who face extraordinary and compelling circumstances, such as a terminal illness that Lynne has, stage 4 cancer in several parts of her body since the breast cancer is metastasized. In these cases, the Department of Justice found that the Bureau of Prisons is not responding promptly. They're barely tracking the requests that they do receive. And they're also basically having a mixed message in terms of what standards one has to meet. Originally, Lynne had asked for compassionate release and was denied. She, in a short way of saying it, wasn't close enough to death. Now, the warden at the prison where she's being held has granted that, and it's anybody's guess exactly what criteria she really met. Since the Department of Justice issued this report, the Bureau of Prisons has since come out and said 18 months is the cutoff point. You have to be 18 months close to dying, essentially, in order for them to consider whether or not you're eligible. And one interesting thing as a reporter that I found is they don't actually track the number of requests they receive or how long it takes them to go through the system. And apparently the Department of Justice has convinced the Bureau of Prisons to consider tracking that, so journalists like myself can see how many of these cases have actually been acknowledged. As we mentioned in the lead into this story, Human Rights Watch did a report in 2012 that found about 24 cases a year are acknowledged out of a population of about 200,000 people being held in Bureau of Prisons. So that's a really low ratio of people having their request for compassionate release granted. And finally, many of the requests have been taking so long to be processed that people die before they're granted.